Among the many thousands of political prisoners currently held in Iran's jails are 7 prominent environmentalists in prison since 2018 and serving lengthy sentences for spying, although no evidence has ever been produced. The former British Council arts curator Aras Amiri spent 2.5 years in the same jail as them, along with Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe, both also accused of working against the Iranian regime. She returned to the UK last year but is now speaking out for the first time to draw attention to the environmentalist plight. Caroline Hawley now reports.
Aras Amiri should now be able to look forward in her life. She's free, back in the UK, and pregnant with her first child. But every day her mind goes back to the prison where she was held for 3 years, and to the friends she made there.
It can be an experience that breaks many people. It has a long-lasting effect on each of us.
Aras was held in the much-feared Evin jail. Like other political prisoners, she spent time in solitary confinement. She was interrogated around the clock, blindfolded and threatened. She still has nightmares about her time there.
Lack of freedom is the hardest thing. The unfairness.
Still in Evin are women who, along with Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe, became her best friends in jail. Nilufar, serving a 10-year sentence, and Sepide.
They're so fun and lively and generous. They're so much loved by all the prisoners.
Why them?
There has been that pressure on environmentalists in Iran who were just doing their own job of conserving nature and wildlife in Iran.
Also in jail is Human, Sepide's husband, here tracking leopard footprints. This is a photo he took of a critically endangered Asiatic cheetah. And this cheetah cub was being looked after by the group. While tracking wild cheetahs with cameras, they were accused of spying, although even members of Iran's government have acknowledged there's no evidence.
It is incredibly unfair every day that they are in prison, and I think already they've been through so much. I just want them to be able to be back to their families, their loved ones, nature, and to protect Iran's wildlife again, which is what they have been always doing and so dedicated to.
The director of the Persian Wildlife Heritage Foundation, Kavus, died in suspicious circumstances in 2018 while under interrogation. Murad Tahbaz co-founded the group. He has British and American citizenship, and his family hoped he would be released alongside Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe last year. But he's still being held, along with Taha, Amir Hussein, and Sam. Aras told me they're not only important scientists, but inspiring human beings.
They really shared with us the love that they have for nature. The fact that they're still kept in, that's really heartbreaking and a big loss for Iran.
She thinks of them every day and says her heart burns for them and for all that they've endured. Caroline Hawley, BBC News.
And Caroline Hawley joins us now from the newsroom. Caroline, do we know anything about how these prisoners are being treated?
We know that they had a terrible time under interrogation. They were held for 2 years in solitary confinement. We know that Nilufar, who you saw in that report, says that she was made to mimic the sounds of wild animals while under interrogation, that she was threatened that she'd be injected with a substance that would paralyse her. She was subjected to sexual threats, and they were all shown pictures of the dead body of the director of the Persian Wildlife Heritage Foundation, Kavus, and told that the same would happen to them and their colleagues. And actually, Sepide, earlier this year in January, on the 5th anniversary of their arrest, wrote about what was going on and what had happened to her and the injustice of it. And she said how they had threatened that her husband, Human, would be next, that she was interrogated in a room with blood all over it, that she heard someone whispering behind her that she was going to be hung. And she also linked what happened to them to what's happening now in Iran and what happened after the arrest of Aras Amiri, who was not wearing her veil properly according to the authorities, and she then died in custody. Her death in custody sparked protests. There have been a huge number of arrests since then and executions. And she wrote, and I have the letter here, this was in January, it came out, "I want to speak up, I want to write for my country and for my fellow women citizens, for the younger generation and for those wounded by injustice. I," she says, "am as much a spy as the dear young people of this land are murderers and rioters. I want you to know that I, like them, was subjected to all kinds of strategies, pressure, torture, interrogation." So they're making a link between the injustice they've suffered and the injustice that many Iranians are still suffering and have suffered since these protests began. But the case of the environmentalist has caused huge international concern. The UN Environment Programme, who Niloufar used to work for, has called for their release, and it is egregious, even by the dismal standard of human rights in Iran, where people do not have the right to a fair trial.
Well, indeed, and it's particularly confusing and difficult, really, to understand at all as to why they're being held if they are environmentalists. What the premise is?
That's right. I think nobody knows. What is clear is that there is no evidence against them, and that was confirmed, if you want, by a committee of government ministers. But we were told by Aras and by others that they worked in close cooperation with local people. One other factor may be that some of them have connections with the West. Kavus, the director of the group, had Canadian citizenship. Murad Tabaz has British citizenship and also American citizenship. And Niloufar used to work for the UN Environment Programme. Could it be that it's their Western connections? But they were arrested by Iran's Revolutionary Guards, who essentially operate as a state within a state. And it may be that they hold a particular grudge. It may be that they thought they could leverage the arrest of these people. And just to mention about Murad, his family had hoped that he'd be released when Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe and Anousheh Ashouri returned home. And I think the hope is now that the Americans may be able to make some deal that would release him. And I think that is probably the hope for the rest of the environmentalists, that if the founder of the group is no longer held, that it will be hard to keep holding them. That is the hope. But otherwise, they've served 5 years, and the sentences that they've had imposed on them range from 6 years to 10 years.
Caroline Hawley, thank you very much indeed.